The boarding pass was snatched from his hand before Henry Carter could say a single word. The soft, tearing sound was so faint it nearly disappeared into the hum of the air conditioning, yet in that moment it rang out like a verdict. Amanda Lewis, young face, neatly groomed blonde hair, a smile as hollow as an empty room, was standing far too close, far too confident in the tiny bit of power she thought she held. She did not tear the paper, but the way she grabbed it, the way her fingers tightened around the edge was enough to make everyone at the first-class counter turn their heads. The air froze. The accusation had been delivered without trial. "You do not belong here." Henry's face remained still, his gaze deep and heavy, like mountain stone. Beside him, Lillian clasped her hands, her calm almost frightening, the kind of calm possessed only by people who have lived long enough to understand that emotional violence sometimes arrives wearing a polite smile. The imaginary camera slid across the scene, capturing every vein rising beneath the skin of Amanda's neck. She was confident. She thought she knew who she was dealing with. She thought this was just an elderly black couple trying to sneak into an upper-class line. "The economy counter is that way," Amanda said. Soft voice words, sharp as a blade, a packaged insult disguised as customer service. But Henry did not move. He simply looked at her. That gaze pulled the camera closer to Amanda's face, where her artificial smile flickered with a thin layer of unease. Still, she did not back down. "I said you are in the wrong area. This is first class, we know," Lillian replied. Just 2 words. But the way she said them, light, steady, calm, felt like a cold piece of metal pressed against the back of the listener's neck. Amanda blinked. Those 2 words carried an energy she could not explain. Not defiance, not fear, but power. A silent kind of power, the sort one does not recognize until it is far too late. "I need to see your tickets," Amanda said, her voice tightening by a fraction. Henry handed her the boarding passes. She looked, frowned, looked again, then shook her head. It must have been an automatic upgrade. "You need to head over to the economy counter so that you can—" "No," Henry said, cutting her off, his voice low. "These are the tickets we purchased." The air vibrated subtly. The camera swung behind him, gliding past the edge of his vest pocket, past the wrinkles time had carved into his cheek, a cheek that had faced more kinds of power than Amanda could ever imagine. At the next counter, an employee named Michael Turner snapped his head up. His eyes widened. He recognized them. Not the way people recognize celebrities, but the way someone recognizes the parents of an entire legacy. He stood up abruptly, but Lillian placed one gentle finger on the edge of her pocket, signaling silently, "Not yet." Amanda continued tapping on her tablet, her eyes darting back and forth, irritation surfacing. "Your names are not displaying correctly. Your system is wrong," Lillian said, her soft voice ringing like a bronze bell in a room too quiet. The annoyance in Amanda's eyes hardened into defensive arrogance. "I work here. I know my system." A simple sentence, but the unspoken question beneath it was the real blade. "And you, what do you know?" A cold breeze from the glass doors lifted the hem of Henry's coat. The camera zoomed in on his hand, steady, unflinching, tightening around his suitcase handle like an old soldier gathering his discipline. He stepped half a pace forward. "Young lady," he said not loudly, yet the words struck the air like a battlefield drum. "You are making a mistake you cannot see." Amanda let out a small laugh, the confident kind from someone who believes they stand on solid ground. "The only mistake here is that you are standing in the wrong line. But right then the camera shifted to an overhead angle, as if the sky itself were watching. A subtle movement appeared in the distance. CEO Ethan Grayson, stepping out of security phone, in-hand tension crossing his face. He had just received a call about a serious incident involving a first-class passenger. He did not know what it was. He did not know who it was. All he knew was that the pulse at the back of his neck was beating faster than usual. Back at the counter, Amanda pushed the boarding pass toward Henry. "I will call security if you do not move." And in that exact second, the air shattered like a crystal glass, hitting white tile. People turned. A security guard looked up. The silence stretched thin, ready to snap. Henry inhaled once. Not angry, not afraid. Just the breath of a man who had lived long enough to know injustice is only the temporary mask of ignorance. Lillian turned to him. Her gaze was soft, but inside it was fire, the same fire that had built an entire aviation industry. The camera locked on Amanda's face. In her eyes there was no recognition, no regret, no instinct telling her she had just touched a high-voltage wire of history. "All right," Henry said. "A simple acceptance, but not acceptance of humiliation, acceptance of letting truth rise by its own weight." In the distance, Ethan began to run. He did not know what he was running toward, but destiny did. The camera froze on Henry Carter's face. No expression, no tremor. But deep in his eyes, a storm of power was forming. A storm Amanda Lewis did not know carried his name. Henry Carter, founder of Aurora Airways. And she was about to throw out the one man no airline in America would ever dare to cross. Everything began the moment she touched that boarding pass, and everything would end in a way she could never imagine. The bell of justice had rung, and it would not stop. Henry stood motionless at the check-in counter, his breathing steady, like the rhythm of an old machine that had never once failed. Amanda kept a strained smile on her lips, trying to conceal the irritation creeping beneath her makeup. She could not understand why the gaze of these two elderly people made her uneasy, as if she were standing before something far larger than herself. Yet she pressed on, still convinced that the tiny authority printed on the badge over her chest granted her the right to judge who belonged in first class. When they stepped away from the counter, the atmosphere behind them twisted like a guitar string, pulled too tight. Michael Turner watched their silhouettes move through the terminal, his hand tightening around the printed document he held. He knew what had just happened, and he also knew what was about to happen would be far worse. But the subtle signal from Mrs. Lillian forced him into silence. They wanted to see. They had come here to witness, and perhaps the entire world was about to witness with them. Henry and Lillian's footsteps echoed across the airport's stone floor, deep and steady like the heartbeat of a great ship slowly waking. The camera followed closely behind them, capturing every detail, Henry's hand resting on the suitcase handle, his fingers trembling only slightly, not from fear, but from a patience that had been tested for far too many years. Lillian's spine, straight like a steel bar forged from a lifetime of battles. They did not walk quickly. They walked at the precise pace of people who knew they had nothing to prove. The door leading to the boarding area slid open. The cold white light of the waiting lounge poured in like a stage, suddenly illuminated. Everything was so bright, one could almost see each dust particle floating in the air. A few passengers turned to look at the two of them, their eyes unconsciously evaluating, categorizing, comparing. Lillian recognized those looks immediately. Not hostile, but full of bias, soft bias, invisible bias, the kind that slipped into the tiniest expressions. Gate agent Jacob Mills looked up, young, bright-eyed, honest. When he saw their boarding passes, he smiled naturally, a smile free of prejudice, free of judgment, just simple human decency. Henry gave a small nod in return. Jacob did not know he had just earned a point for Aurora Airways, and that point would soon become incredibly valuable. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, the camera pulled back into a wider angle, revealing another figure approaching the boarding area from the opposite direction. COO Ethan Grayson, his face tense like a tightened string, his suit jacket unbuttoned because he had been running his tie slightly crooked. He did not know what he was running toward. He only knew that if he let this moment slip through his fingers, the legacy entrusted to him would crack and collapse like a structure built on sand. The aircraft door opened. A rush of cool cabin air blew across Henry and Lillian's faces. The camera cut immediately to a close-up as Amanda appeared at the entrance greeting passengers. The moment she saw them, her smile did not simply fade, it was ripped off her face as if someone had yanked a hidden string. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes dropped to their modest clothing, then back to the boarding pass, then back to their faces as if trying to decode an anomaly. "Boarding pass," she said, her voice clipped flat, devoid of warmth. Henry handed her the card. Amanda looked once, twice, a third time. Her expression shifted from suspicion to annoyance to defensive arrogance. The camera slid to seat 1 Charlie, where Robert Hale watched the exchange. He raised an eyebrow, sensing the injustice unfolding, but he remained quiet, not yet. Amanda returned the card without even looking at them. Seats 2 Alpha and 2 Bravo. The words followed protocol. The tone violated the entire spirit of the airline. No greeting, no eye contact, no respect. But the worst was still to come. As they moved deeper into the cabin, Amanda watched them out of the corner of her eye, sharp as a needle, evaluating, probing, searching for an explanation as to why they were here. The camera zoomed in on her eyes full of confidence and self-satisfaction, completely unaware she was about to become the center of a storm, powerful enough to tear apart an entire system she believed she represented. Daniel Brooks, the first-class attendant, was preparing a tray of drinks. He saw them, and in an instant he straightened. His eyes softened not from surprise but from respect. Lillian glanced at him, tilting her head just slightly. He understood. Say nothing, reveal nothing, do nothing to interfere. They wanted the truth to expose itself by its own light. Henry sat down. The first-class seat fabric rustled softly. He rested his hand on the armrest. Lillian adjusted her small bag beneath her feet, then scanned the cabin. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Yet a nothing quite resembled what they had once designed. Something felt off. The way passengers looked at each other felt off. The way the crew moved felt off. Wrong in small ways, but wrong, constantly wrong, like groundwater, leaking beneath concrete. And small wrongs create great rot. Amanda passed by them again, deliberately, without stopping. No welcome drink, no warm towel, no courtesy. She chatted cheerfully with the white passenger, in front, her voice sweet as syrup, then went silent the moment she reached their row. The camera zoomed in on Lillian's hand, resting on her lap. Her hand closed slowly, subtly, a tiny movement only someone who had lived long enough would know how to hide. Henry leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "You see it." She replied softly, without turning her head, "I see it. And you know this is only the beginning. The camera pulled back, shaking slightly, like the rising heartbeat of a giant creature beginning to wake. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from cool to tense, from tense to suffocating. No one knew that the two elderly passengers sitting quietly in the second row were the roots of the entire structure called Aurora Airways, and no one knew that the flight attendant who had shown them disrespect had just placed her hand on a lever capable of lifting her entire career into the air or smashing it to pieces. The flight had barely begun, but justice had already slid the bolt into place, ready to close behind those who had erred. Henry leaned back into his seat, but his eyes never rested. He stared straight down the aisle, where Amanda was tilting a bottle to pour wine for a white passenger in the row ahead, her smile widening, as if this entire cabin existed solely to serve him. The camera lingered on her hand, graceful, delicate, precise, as though that level of care was reserved only for those she deemed worthy. When she walked past row 2, the smile vanished. No words, no glance, no sign of one human being acknowledging another. Only emptiness, coldness, an invisible barrier she placed between herself and the two people sitting there. Lillian said nothing. She did not need to. Her eyes quietly tracked every small movement, the slight lift of Amanda's shoulder, as she passed them, the defensive posture of someone who feared authority, yet did not realize the true authority was sitting directly in front of her. A familiar ache rose in Lillian's chest, the same ache that once drove her to build an entire airline just to end the kind of injustice now unfolding before her eyes. The camera shifted to Daniel Brooks, standing at the front of the cabin, the only person on board who understood exactly which volcano was about to erupt. He saw Amanda ignoring them. He saw the sloppy pour that spilled water across a white passenger's tray, followed by an immediate apology. He saw the lack of respect, the discrimination disguised as routine behavior, yet shaped by a systemic mindset. And he knew none of this was just the fault of the young woman in uniform. A cabin crew is the shadow of its management. A misguided system produces countless Amandas, each one convinced she is simply following procedure. Henry tilted his head slightly, sensing the shift in the cabin. Something was approaching. A storm, a breaking point. A moment he had witnessed countless times before, the moment a person with small authority becomes convinced they outrank someone who holds real power. He had seen it in the military, in politics, in business. It repeated endlessly like an old pattern the world never learned to correct. Amanda walked by again. This time she carried a tray of water. She served row 3, row 4, row 5, then turned around and returned to the front, as if row 2 did not exist. The camera zoomed in on Lillian's face. No anger, no sadness, only the quiet pain of a woman watching her life's creation being chipped away piece by piece inside the very cabin that was meant to symbolize dignity. Daniel could not take it anymore. He picked up 2 fresh glasses of water, warm towels, linen coasters, and a small service tray, and he walked towards them. He performed every step exactly as Henry and Lillian had once taught the airline to do the standards he had trained under for wars. "Your water, sir and ma'am," he said, his voice low and respectful. He did not say their names, did not reveal anything, but his eyes carried a glow of gratitude for them, for their legacy, for the opportunities this airline had once given people like him. Henry nodded faintly. Lillian gave a subtle, elegant smile, just enough to tell Daniel he had done the right thing. The camera shifted to Amanda a few meters away. Her eyes narrowed when she saw him serve them. A spark of jealousy flashed the sense that Daniel was over-serving passengers she believed were merely upgraded. Her pride stung, her irritation flared, and that was the first small ember of the fire she would soon ignite beneath her own career. A light turbulence rippled. The cabin trembled. The seatbelt sign chimed. Amanda settled into the jump seat, directly facing them, no longer able to avoid eye contact. In that moment, the camera focused on her eyes. For the first time since the flight began, she was forced to look directly at the two people she had dismissed since the check-in counter. Lillian's face tightened slightly. A small pain flickered across her chest. Henry turned to her, instantly concern flashing in his eyes. From the front, Daniel noticed the movement. He moved as if to stand, but another jolt of turbulence kept him in place. Amanda sat across from them, her expression shifting. No more arrogance, no more aloofness, but something new, something sharp, something real. The awareness that something was wrong. Genuine worry appeared on her face for the first time. "Are you all right?" Henry asked softly. "Just a little discomfort," Lillian replied. "I will be fine." Amanda heard it. The tension in her eyes deepened. Her professional instincts pushed forward, but crashed into the wall of bias she had carried since the beginning. She did not know whether she should care or continue behaving as she had. That hesitation created a charged, uncomfortable silence across the cabin. Daniel unbuckled his belt, despite the shaking. He walked quickly down the aisle. "Let me check the manifest for a doctor on board," he said, urgency in his voice, but maintaining the calm of someone trained for difficult situations. And when he called out Mrs. Carter, his voice steady for just one beat, Amanda's face froze. The camera zoomed in sharply. Her pupils contracted. A name, a memory fragment. A story from orientation she had ignored. A faded poster in the crew lounge. A news article about two black founders in aviation, Henry and Lillian Carter. The vein in her neck pulsed. Her entire body locked. And within a single breath, her entire perception collapsed like a building erected on the wrong foundation. She had not merely disrespected two passengers. She had disrespected the true owners of the sky. The air in the first-class cabin thickened, as if compressed into a single heavy mass. Amanda remained seated across from them, her back pressed tightly against the jump seat, her eyes wide, her breath quicker than normal. It was not the turbulence. It was the truth that had just crashed down on her, like a steel door dropping from the ceiling of the aircraft. Henry Carter. Lillian Carter. Not common names. Not names that happened to appear on a boarding pass. They were the names printed on the founding documents of Aurora Airways, the names displayed on the founder's wall in the Atlanta headquarters, the names every employee learned during their very first training session, though many like Amanda had listened, passingly treating them as distant history that had nothing to do with their daily routines. The camera moved in close to her face. Sweat began to form at her temples. Her lips trembled. Fragmented memories surged through her mind, pieces of the orientation video. The instructor's voice, saying Aurora was built to ensure every passenger is treated with equal dignity, and her own inner voice whispering sharp as a blade. What have I done? Daniel returned from the front tablet, manifest in hand. His eyes sharpened when he saw the fear in Amanda's expression, but he did not stop. He knelt beside Henry and Lillian's seats, his voice low steady, filled with genuine concern. "I have checked. There are 2 doctors on board. If you need further assistance, I will call them immediately." Lillian inhaled slowly, letting the faint discomfort in her chest settle. "That will not be necessary," she said. "Thank you." Henry placed his hand over hers. The connection between them, silent yet powerful, formed a shield protecting them from everything beyond that moment. The camera shifted to Amanda. Her eyes darted wildly. The layers of prejudice she had always considered harmless curled inward like blades aimed at her own career. She opened her mouth, searching for words, an apology, an explanation, anything, but her throat tightened. She did not dare speak. She did not know where to begin, especially when what she had done was not merely wrong, it was unforgivable in an airline created precisely to prevent such injustice. The plane shook lightly again, but this time Amanda did not seem to feel it. She stared at the two people before her, as if they were the verdict she had been avoiding her entire life. Her pulse pounded so hard her ears buzzed. The camera swept across the cabin, where a few passengers had overheard the name Carter from Daniel's earlier words. One man glanced at his phone, typing quickly, as if checking something. His expression shifted gradually into astonishment. Another passenger looked up with a mixture of reverence and confusion, as though realizing he was sitting near legends he had only read about in business articles. A woman whispered to her husband, "Is it them?" He nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving Henry and Lillian, who sat as still as carved stone, serene, despite the storm beginning to rise throughout the cabin. Daniel turned toward Amanda. His gaze held no hatred, no superiority of someone who knew he was right. It held only one message, sharp as a blade resting on a table you crossed the line. Amanda tried to stand, but her legs refused to cooperate. The jump seat felt like a courtroom chair, binding her in place. A flight attendant from the rear cabin, unaware of what had happened, stepped forward and whispered, "What is going on?" Amanda shook her head. Her lips parted, as if to say, "I do not know," but she knew far too well. Henry turned to look at her. Not with anger, not with accusation. Just one steady gaze deep enough to force a person to see themselves clearly and to face the disappointment no one ever wants to bear. Lillian didn't look at Amanda. She looked straight ahead, as if seeing through the aircraft wall, through the grey sky, outside, through the decades she and Henry had spent fighting to build this airline. She saw her past, and she saw how it was being distorted right before her eyes. The captain's announcement cut through the cabin, his voice calm and steady, but to Amanda it sounded like the opening bell of a trial. The aircraft was approaching stable altitude. Service would resume soon. She would have to stand. She would have to walk past them. She would have to face the truth or attempt to escape it. The camera focused tightly on Amanda's face as she unbuckled her belt. Her hand trembled just slightly, but enough to be seen. When she stood, her shadow stretched down the aisle, long and unsteady, as if even her silhouette could no longer hold itself upright. She did not walk immediately. 1 beat, 2 beats, her breath caught in her chest. She looked down at Henry and Lillian, her lips parting, but no sound emerging. A flight attendant is trained never to lose composure, but a human being can. And at that moment, Amanda was no longer standing there as a flight attendant. She stood as a person who had just realized she had made a mistake far greater than she ever imagined. The cabin still did not know what was coming, but one thing had become undeniable. The balance of power had shifted. No longer toward the small nameplate on Amanda's uniform. No longer toward the illusion of authority in her polite smile. But toward the man and woman sitting quietly in the second row, the ones who did not need to raise their voices, for the entire sky to realign itself around them. Service in the first-class cabin resumed, and the air tightened like the surface of water, about to shatter under a heavy rain. Amanda pushed the service cart out of the galley, her hand still trembling, though she tried to hide it by gripping the metal handle hard. The wheels rolled across the floor with a cold, steady sound, like a sentence being dragged slowly toward its destination. She served the first row. The wine was poured with perfect precision. Her smile returned, but it was a strained, crooked smile, her pupils slightly widened by fear, gnawing from the inside. The man in seat 1, Charlie Robert Hale, watched her with a peculiar expression. He had seen the stark difference between how she treated the passengers in front and the 2 passengers behind. But he said nothing. He simply observed, waiting, like everyone else in the cabin, waiting for the moment the truth would reveal itself fully. When Amanda pushed the cart toward row 2, the camera skimmed along the floor before tilting upward, capturing Henry and Lillian, sitting upright, silent, their eyes steady and unflinching. They did not ask. They did not complain. But their silence was a louder accusation than any shout could ever be. Amanda hesitated. 1 split second stretched into a cliff edge. She wanted to serve them first to redeem herself. But the old instinct, the same instinct that had misled her at the check-in counter, urged her to skip them once more. She heard her heartbeat pounding like war drums behind her ears. She turned the cart toward row 3, leaving row 2 behind her. Robert Hale watched his brow tightening. Another passenger glanced over, then another. The scattered looks began to connect, forming the outline of a map of injustice slowly illuminated. Amanda served rows 3, 4, and 5, and she tried to keep her breathing steady, but her avoidance was too obvious, like a spreading black ink stain on a blank canvas. When she returned to row 2, there was nowhere left to hide. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked. Her voice cold, flat, stripped of the tone of respect she used for others. It sounded exactly like the tone she had used with them since the beginning, nothing like the soft, even polite tone she offered white passengers. Henry looked straight at her. A gaze not loud, not threatening, but powerful enough to force someone to confront themselves. "Lemon water for both," he said. Amanda poured too quickly. Water spilled over the rim and splashed onto Lillian's sleeve, darkening the purple fabric. She froze. Lillian slowly lifted a napkin and dabbed the water. She said nothing, and that silence crushed Amanda more than any reprimand could. Daniel appeared like a shift in the wind. He carried warm towels, coasters, and freshly poured water prepared exactly to Aurora's original training standards. He knelt beside Lillian's seat, tending to the spill with absolute professionalism. No display, no attitude, just pure adherence to the values the airline was built on. Henry's voice came low but sharp. "Thank you, Daniel." Amanda watched the scene like someone seeing her flawless opposite, reflected back at her. A living reminder that the standard existed right in front of her, within reach, yet she had chosen to move in the opposite direction. She could not bear it any longer. She pulled Daniel toward the galley, her voice lowered to a whisper, tainted with bitterness. "What are you doing? They are just upgraded passengers. You are overdoing it." Daniel turned his eyes, steel hard, forged by conviction. "I am doing what is right. Do you know what is wrong?" Amanda snapped back, her voice trembling. "They do not belong in this cabin. Daniel, look at them." The camera swung sharply, catching the moment Daniel's eyes widened with disbelief and anger. "My God, Amanda, what did you just say?" He stepped closer, his voice tightening into a precise blade. "Do you know who they are?" Amanda froze, her face drained of color, but Daniel did not allow her room to form excuses. He spoke slowly, each word dropping like metal onto the floor. "That is Henry and Lillian Carter." The air seemed to vanish from the cabin. Amanda felt her mind spin. Daniel continued, "They are the founders of Aurora Airways. They are the reason you have a job, the reason this airline exists." Amanda swayed her breath, fractured her eyes, widening as if watching herself commit an unforgivable sin in real time. In the cabin, Robert Hale was now speaking to the passenger beside him. He had found an old article on his phone, a photo of Henry and Lillian at the launch of Aurora's first flight. Other passengers began searching as well. Their faces shifted as recognition spread. A wave of awareness rippled quickly from row 1 through row 5. Everyone understood what Amanda had done, and how grave it truly was. Amanda stood frozen, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. The behaviors of the entire morning replayed in her mind like a sped-up film. The dismissive looks, the tone, the avoidance, the biased assumptions. She felt her entire nervous system reversing direction, burning with shame through every muscle. The camera returned to row 2. Henry and Lillian sat still, but their silence was no longer peaceful. It carried the weight of justice, the weight of truth, the weight of two people who had built an empire only to witness it being eroded by the very hands meant to uphold it. Amanda knew there was no way back. No words could repair it. No apology could save her. And from the cockpit, the newest message had been sent to the ground VIP founders. On board, prepare reception at arrival. No one in the cabin knew. But at the Atlanta airport, the entire system was beginning to move. And Amanda Lewis stood at the epicenter of the coming earthquake. The message from the cockpit reached the ground in only a few seconds, but its effect spread like a shockwave running through an overloaded electrical grid. Meanwhile, on board the aircraft, Amanda tried to steady herself, yet everything around her felt too bright, too quiet, too sharp, as if she could hear every beat of her own heart. Daniel had returned to the first-class cabin, serving calmly as though no disturbance had ever rippled through the air. But that very calmness made Amanda lose control even more. It reflected one simple truth. She was the only person in the cabin who had lost the professionalism she believed she possessed so well. Henry and Lillian remained seated in silence, but their silence was no longer gentle. It had become a low-pressure zone, expanding outward, pulling in curious, uneasy, and increasingly respectful looks from the surrounding passengers. They were not speaking yet. Everyone in the cabin could read the atmosphere. Something larger than the aircraft itself was forming. Amanda wanted to approach them, wanted to apologize, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. She knew that any apology spoken now would be far too late. An apology could soothe a small mistake, but her mistake was not small. It was structural. It exposed an invisible weakness the airline had long convinced itself did not exist. From above, the camera looked down the aisle. Amanda stood near the galley, half hidden behind the curtain, her eyes avoiding contact at all costs. In that moment, she was no longer a confident flight attendant. She was someone waiting for a verdict to fall. In seat 1, Charlie, Robert Hale, slowly put down his phone. He had just finished reading a long interview with Henry Carter about the creation of Aurora Airways. His expression shifted from curiosity to admiration to indignation as he connected what he had read with the way the Carters had just been treated. He glanced toward row 2. His eyes now held a protective instinct for those who deserved more respect than anyone else on that aircraft. Daniel continued working. He walked to the back of the cabin to collect more warm towels, but each time he passed row 2, he slowed just slightly, checking on Lillian's condition without disturbing her. Henry noticed this. A small glance, subtle, but filled with acknowledgement, a quiet beam of gratitude shining on the right person. And Amanda saw all of it. That was what made her want to disappear. The cabin gradually stabilized. The turbulence had passed. The seatbelt sign switched off. The main meal service was about to begin. Daniel stood near the galley, arranging each dish with precise rhythm. Amanda stood beside him, but her hands were stiff, her movements out of sync with every step. Daniel inhaled deeply, as if preparing to say something he knew would break her even further. "You should brace yourself." His voice was neither cold nor gentle. It was the voice of someone aligned with justice, not emotion. "What is happening here will not end on this plane." Amanda looked at him, fear widening her eyes. "Do you think they will report me?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He placed a salad onto the service cart before responding, his voice low but sharp. "Amanda, they are the founders of this airline. They are not the type of passengers who create conflict. They observe, they remember, and they act." "Do you truly believe this will be ignored?" Amanda swallowed hard, a tear trembling at the corner of her eye, but she forced it back. Not because she wanted to appear strong, but because she feared that if one tear fell, it would unleash the entire flood behind it. Across the cabin, the camera focused on Lillian's face. She was watching Amanda from afar, not with anger, but with profound sadness. A sadness born from seeing the tree she had planted being eaten from within. A sadness of someone who spent a lifetime breaking barriers only to witness old walls being rebuilt by those wearing the very uniform meant to represent her legacy. Henry leaned back, looking up at the cabin ceiling. The LED light strips cast a clean, cool glow. He remembered clearly the day he and Lillian chose the colors, the layout, the philosophy for this first-class cabin. Everything was born from one question. How can every passenger feel respected the moment they step on board? But now, sitting in the space he helped design, he felt only one truth, that philosophy had been pushed aside over time. Amanda eventually had no choice but to push the service cart forward again. Daniel led with smooth precision. Amanda followed, struggling to match his pace. When they reached row 2, Daniel stopped and asked Henry and Lillian for their selections, following protocol perfectly. Henry replied calmly. Amanda stood behind him, unable to lift her head, unable to look into the eyes she had dismissed all morning. A soft chime sounded from the control panel at the front, a message from the ground sent to the cockpit. Daniel turned his head. He did not need to read it to know what it said. He only needed to see the expression on the first officer's face, which shifted instantly into a mixture of shock and tension. Daniel felt the shift ripple down into the cabin like an undercurrent. It confirmed everything he had predicted. The ground now knew the founders were on this flight. The reception protocol was already being set in motion, and a confrontation at the leadership level was waiting at the aircraft door. In the first-class cabin, only one person remained unaware. Amanda Lewis. But she would know. Very soon. And in a way, no one would be able to save her from. The air in the first-class cabin settled into an unnatural stillness. Not peaceful, but the kind of silence found at the eye of a storm, where everything holds still, only to gather more power before tearing everything apart. Daniel pushed the service cart back into the galley to prepare the next round of service, while Amanda stood pressed against the wall, her hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She heard the whispers from the passengers ahead. The murmurs were small, sharp as needles piercing through every layer of confidence she had once displayed. Is it really them I saw the article? Those are the founders of the airline. Then that flight attendant, she did not hear the rest. She heard enough to know the cabin was shifting. They were no longer looking at Henry and Lillian as ordinary passengers. They were looking at her, as witnesses, as judges, as a silent jury. Lillian sat still, her gaze drifting out the window. White clouds passed beneath eyes that had witnessed decades of discrimination in aviation, something she and Henry had spent their lives fighting to dismantle. She did not want to see it return. She did not want to watch fragments of prejudice seep back into a space they had built with the belief that everyone deserved respect. But it had returned on the very aircraft that carried their name, and that truth hurt more deeply than any public insult. The camera shifted to Henry. He was reading an internal report on his tablet, a document he had brought for the trip to Atlanta. A chart appeared. The upward line of discrimination, related complaints climbed quarter after quarter. He stared at it without blinking, as though the data was falling perfectly into place with the moment at the check-in counter, with Amanda's cold movements, with each layered silence in her attitude while serving. He closed the tablet. He chose not to speak further. He did not need to. Action would come on the ground. Amanda stepped out of the galley. She had no choice but to continue working, though her mind was racing like overloaded wiring. Every step felt heavy, as if the floor itself tilted and pushed her toward the truth she could no longer outrun. She tried to force a professional smile, but the slight tremble in her hands betrayed her before her lips could lift. Robert Hale watched her as she approached. His eyes hardened. He did not need to say a word. The look alone from a businessman who had stood in countless high-stakes negotiations was enough to pierce the fragile defenses Amanda was desperately trying to rebuild. She lowered her head more than usual, an instinctive reaction when a person stands before real authority. Daniel stepped forward to begin the main service. In the cabin, only row 2 had yet to be served, and Amanda knew it. She knew that empty gap was where every mistake she had made gathered like a dark stain against the pristine surface of procedure. But she could not retreat. She could not vanish. She could not switch duties. She had to face it. Daniel approached first. "What would you like to begin with?" he asked. Henry responded with a calmness so steady it made Amanda's throat tighten. No anger, no harshness, just calm, and that calmness made everything worse for her. It showed he did not see her as a threat, but as evidence that would be handled at a level of power she could never reach. Daniel noted their order and stepped back to let Amanda serve her portion of the service. In that moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Amanda lifted the tray. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to keep the tray balanced. She set the meal down in front of Henry, then in front of Lillian. Everything was more precise than moments before, but far too late to undo anything. As she placed the meal on Lillian's table, her finger brushed the edge of the tray. A small touch, but Lillian felt it. She looked up. Just for a moment. One glance. A calm gaze, cold enough to make Amanda step back half a pace. That gaze did not say, "I am angry." It did not say, "You are wrong." It said something Entirely different, I see you. I see the system that created you. And I will not overlook this." Amanda swallowed hard. She turned away. But Daniel was still there, watching as if assigned to witness every detail. His eyes held something Amanda could not bear belief. Belief in the airline. Belief in its founding principles. Belief in the two people in row 2. And that belief made her feel even smaller, as if she had not only betrayed 2 passengers, but betrayed the very soul of her profession. The camera cut to the exterior of the aircraft, a smooth glide across the white fuselage of Aurora. In the distance, the Atlanta airport had already received the alert and was preparing for an unexpected arrival, senior management being pulled out of meetings, the airport operations chief rushing toward the gate, even a few internal reporters hearing whispers from the operations center. Back in the cabin, Henry placed his napkin on his lap. Lillian rested her hand lightly on the edge of the table. They did not look at each other, but their movements carried the synchronized cadence of 2 people who had endured more than 50 years of fighting the same battle. They did not need to speak to understand that this moment was no mere personal incident. It was a signal that the very thing they feared had finally become real. Aurora was drifting off the course they had set. Amanda hid behind the service cart, her palms cold. Daniel glanced subtly toward Henry and Lillian, an almost invisible gesture, yet filled with an unspoken promise that the truth would not be ignored. Robert Hale sat straighter, closing his phone, his eyes fixed toward the front of the aircraft, where he knew a welcome fit for royalty was already being prepared. The cabin remained quiet, but it was no longer the quiet of first-class comfort. It was the quiet of waiting, of confrontation, of justice drawing near. The aircraft began its descent. The sound shifted deeper and heavier, as if the sky itself were bracing for the confrontation waiting behind the metal door. While the cabin lights adjusted, Amanda stood frozen at her jump seat, gripping the edge of the seat so tightly her fingers had turned pale, like someone about to be called into a courtroom. She heard every small click as passengers folded their trays, tightened their seatbelts, adjusted their posture. Every sound made her flinch. Daniel performed his final cabin check. He walked the aisle with careful movements and steady breath, but his eyes kept sweeping toward row 2. It was not a safety check. It was protection. Henry gave Daniel a subtle nod as he passed. A tiny gesture weighted with meaning, acknowledging Daniel's professionalism, reminding him that what was right in this cabin still existed, even if it was buried under layers of wrong that were now beginning to surface. Lillian placed her hand on her chest, not from pain, but from readiness, the instinct of someone who knew that outside this aircraft, Aurora's headquarters was already in upheaval, that the people she trusted had grown complacent, that the airline they built was cracking in places no one wanted to confront. She had intended this inspection trip to be routine, but now it had become a turning point. No longer an observation. It was an intervention. Amanda saw that look, the look of a woman who carried an entire legacy in every breath. And Amanda understood better than anyone that her clumsy actions were not just mistakes. They were evidence. Evidence of a deeper problem, bigger than her, bigger than this flight, bigger than the fear tightening her throat. The captain's voice boomed through the speaker's firm and commanding, "Prepare for landing." But to Amanda, the announcement sounded like a tolling bell marking the moment judgment approached. She swallowed hard, palms damp with sweat, and her eyes darted toward the aircraft's front door, where she knew a senior reception team was already waiting. The camera cut to the ground, managers running down glass hallways, name badges shaking with each step, the head of airport operations adjusting his tie in a reflective column, a director's assistant holding a welcome bouquet with trembling hands. Every one of them understood if the founders arrived displeased, everything could change within one afternoon. A brand crisis, an emergency leadership meeting, a top-level reshuffling. All of it could begin in the next few minutes. On the aircraft, Henry tilted his head toward the window as Atlanta appeared beneath a thin layer of clouds, a city they once called their second home, the birthplace of Aurora, where every first flight took off. But now, looking down, he felt the city no longer fully belonged to them. It had been taken over by people who saw profit but forgot the soul of the airline. Lillian exhaled slowly. Not a tired breath, but the breath of someone gathering strength. She placed her hand on Henry's. Their eyes met. No words, but their thoughts blended like two familiar streams. It is time to correct the course. The camera returned to Amanda, still standing at her jump seat, her frightened eyes flicking toward them, but never daring to linger. The wheels touched the runway with a heavy thud, rattling the cabin. Amanda jolted, not from the landing, but from knowing the flight was ending, and the opening of the aircraft door would not free her, but expose her. The aircraft rolled toward the gate, toward the... Light shifted across the window, the sun catching the Aurora logo on the wing, a silent reminder of the values everyone had forgotten. Inside the cabin, silence spread. No one spoke. No one moved abruptly. Everyone waited. The chime sounded, signaling the door was ready to open. Daniel took his position at the front. Amanda stood beside him, trying to adjust her uniform, smooth her hair, but her trembling hands made every gesture awkward. She had no idea what she was about to face, only that it was big. Big enough for her entire body to shake beneath its weight. The door opened. Airport air rushed in, and with it came the gazes of those waiting senior staff department heads, security managers. And at the center, dressed in a dark suit with a tightly knotted tie and a face carved from tension, CEO Ethan Grayson. Ethan looked into the cabin. He looked straight toward row 2, and his eyes froze the moment he saw Henry and Lillian. A truth fell like a blade. Not only the cabin knew, not only the crew knew, now the highest leadership of Aurora knew this flight was unlike any other. Amanda saw his reaction, and in that instant, she understood her future would be decided within the next few minutes. Not by the passengers, not by Daniel, but by the two people she had tried to push out of the first-class line that morning. Henry and Lillian adjusted their clothing, and stepped into the aisle. Not hurried, not shaken. They walked with the posture of people who knew the entire system now leaned toward them, and that they would restore it, even if they had to begin with the ashes of today's mistakes. The entire first-class cabin held its breath as Henry and Lillian walked toward the aircraft door. Each step echoed firmly against the floor like the strike of a hammer against the metal walls of the very system they had built, a system now cracking and about to be examined down to its roots. The camera followed close behind them, capturing every detail, Lillian's hand lightly resting on the armrest, her back straight, her chin lifted, and Henry walking as if he were stepping back onto the very first Aurora aircraft, the one he once piloted across the routes that shaped the airline's earliest history. When they appeared at the door, Ethan Grayson froze as if pulled backward by an invisible wire. His eyes widened for just a fraction of a second, but long enough for everyone behind him to read the shock. In all his years as CEO, Ethan had faced the board, the press international partners, but never had he felt as small as he did in this moment, standing before these two people. In Lillian's eyes, he saw the values he had abandoned. In Henry's eyes, he saw the warning he had tried to avoid for the past 2 years. Ethan stepped forward, forcing a leader's smile, but it faltered the moment he spoke. "Welcome to Atlanta." His voice caught in his throat, as if tightening at the thought of how they had been treated on the aircraft that carried their name. Lillian did not respond. She simply looked at him, one long, silent beat, a beat heavy as 100 pages of cultural audit reports detailing everything that had gone wrong inside Aurora. Henry gave a brief nod, a greeting reduced to its bare minimum. Not cold, not warm, just enough to uphold his own integrity. The camera shifted to Amanda. She stood behind Daniel, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. She saw Ethan slightly bow his head when Henry and Lillian passed. She saw the entire management team straighten their posture, adjusting jackets, and standing as though they were greeting heads of state, not 2 elderly first-class passengers. And she understood. Painfully. She had misjudged them. Completely. Disastrously. No word could describe how wrong she had been. Daniel kept a respectful distance, careful not to intrude on the space between them and the CEO. In his eyes, the respect he held for Henry and Lillian was so vivid it made Amanda feel stripped bare. Respect cannot be faked. Reverence cannot be acted. It was real, and it highlighted the painful contrast between how Daniel saw them and how Amanda had seen them all morning. A group of passengers stepped off the aircraft, but upon witnessing the unusual reception, their pace slowed. One man stopped entirely, whispering to his friend, "It really is them." A woman lifted her phone to record, not out of curiosity, but out of disbelief at seeing the founders being greeted like heads of state. What had happened inside the cabin, quietly and privately, was now leaking into the world through the eyes of witnesses. Amanda retreated deeper into the galley, her body trembling in shock. She saw the aircraft door, saw hands reaching out to greet the two founders, saw the faces of managers caught between embarrassment and forced composure. And she understood one thing with absolute clarity. Today's events would not end in the cabin. They would enter reports, meetings, corporate culture reviews. They would be dissected, analyzed, documented, and her name would be in every file. Henry and Lillian stepped into the jet bridge without looking back, but the camera did. Daniel stood straight, his eyes following them with quiet gratitude. Robert Hale stood near the door phone, in hand, but not recording, simply standing like a man who had just witnessed history repeat itself, watching 2 living symbols of justice step into a new battle. Ethan walked beside them, smiling, but the tension in his face was unmistakable. Every step felt like walking closer to a courtroom where he knew he would be questioned. Aurora's headquarters was waiting. The board was waiting. And Ethan knew one question from Henry could shake the structure of his leadership. At the end of the jet bridge, an employee rushed forward and bowed slightly before Henry and Lillian. "We are honored to welcome you. The meeting room is ready." Lillian nodded softly. Henry replied, "Good. We have many things to address." A breeze from a side door swept through the hallway, lifting the edge of Lillian's coat. The camera zoomed in on her face, calm, stern, unwavering. The face of a mother looking at a child she built with her own hands, now in need of being reshaped. Then, without warning, Henry stopped in the middle of the corridor. He looked directly at a poster on the wall, Aurora Airways Dignity in the Sky. The slogan they had written by hand on the very first night of the airline's creation. A slogan Amanda had disregarded that morning. A slogan leadership had hollowed into meaningless branding. Henry turned to Ethan, his gaze sharp as a blade slicing steel. "Ethan, do you believe Aurora still flies with the dignity it had the day we built it?" Ethan stood silent, unable to answer. And in that silence, the entire corridor understood the question Henry had just asked was the beginning of an earthquake. The 15th floor conference room at Aurora headquarters was perfectly soundproof, yet everyone could feel the weight of what was about to unfold inside. When Henry and Lillian entered, every member of the board rose to their feet. The high-backed leather chairs, the long walnut table stretching across the room, the large screen displaying the Aurora logo, all those luxurious details suddenly seemed small beside the presence of the two founders. Lillian did not look around. She walked to the chair at the head of the table as if she had never left it, even though she had been absent from direct leadership for years. Henry stood beside her, calm but sharp, radiating a force that made the entire room adjust its posture. Ethan Grayson entered only a few seconds later. He tried to maintain a steady pace, but his shoulders were tight, and the tie he had just straightened was already slipping slightly from sweat. When he took his seat, the energy of the room shifted. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The questioning had begun. Henry placed a thin file on the table. Not thick, not heavy, but every experienced leader in the room understood what that meant. Thin files were the dangerous ones, because they contained information distilled to a point where it could not be argued with. He did not open it yet. He simply looked at the board members' faces that had once proudly guided Aurora through years of growth, yet had also allowed the airline to drift further and further from its original purpose. We took a single flight. Just one. Henry said, his voice low and sharp as a laser cut, and in only a few hours we saw enough to tell us Aurora is veering far more off course than we believed. A board member swallowed hard. Another adjusted his glasses. Lillian lifted her chin, her gaze sweeping across the room. "We have been receiving reports for months," she said. "But data is never as powerful as the truth we see with our own eyes." Ethan tried to steady himself. "I believe every incident on today's flight can be explained," Ethan Henry cut in, his voice not raised yet strong enough to freeze the air. "We are not here for explanations. We are here for the truth." He opened the file. The first page displayed a quarterly chart of discrimination complaints. The rising curve looked like a blade driving straight into the heart of the brand. Henry tapped the screen and mirrored the data onto the large display for all to see. An increase of 87% in 2 years. 87%. He repeated the number, each syllable falling like a hammer strike. A board member exhaled shakily. "We have known about this issue." "You have known," Lillian said, her voice cold as forged steel. "And you did nothing." A clip from the cabin security system played on the screen footage Daniel had flagged just before the aircraft door opened. The board watched. Amanda skip row 2 watched her serve others with a completely different tone. Watched the water spill onto Lillian's sleeve, heard her say, "They do not belong in this cabin." One board member covered his mouth in disbelief. Another turned away. But Ethan still tried to defend the organization. "We cannot place all responsibility on a single flight attendant, correct?" Lillian said. "We cannot." She paused, letting the silence sharpen her words. Because this problem does not belong to one person. Her eyes locked onto Ethan. It belongs to leadership. The room fell silent, as if the air itself had been removed. Ethan opened his mouth, but Henry raised a hand. It is not the attendants who must re-examine Aurora's values. It is the training system, the oversight system, and the leadership. His gaze fixed on the CEO, especially the one at the top. Lillian rose and walked toward the screen. The camera closed in on her face. Calm, firm, holding the strength of a mother, protecting the child she built. Aurora was created to dismantle prejudice, she said, not to reproduce it in subtler ways. She pointed to the video of Amanda serving. This is not a personal failure. This is the result of a culture that has been eroded. No one argued. No one dared. Ethan inhaled like a man preparing to walk through fire. I understand. But please allow me. You are correct about one thing, Henry interrupted. The attendant is not solely responsible. She is the product of cultural drift you allowed to happen. The accusation hit with the weight of a stone. Ethan leaned back, stunned. The board members turned to him. No one defended him. No one even met his eyes. The power in the room had shifted entirely. Lillian returned to her seat. We have two decisions. The room tightened. One Amanda Lewis will not be terminated. A board member blinked in surprise. Ethan was taken aback, but Lillian continued. She will enter a mandatory retraining program and will work with me directly to rebuild Aurora's cultural training system. A sharp turn, precise mercy, a message mistakes must be corrected, at the root not swept beneath a rug. Henry spoke next. To Ethan, you must choose. You either commit immediately to restoring Aurora's core values and work under our direct oversight. He paused, the silence slicing through the room. Or you step down as CEO. No one breathed loudly. No one moved. Ethan looked at Lillian, then at Henry. Then at the board, none of whom returned his gaze. He understood. This was no negotiation. This was a verdict. For a brief moment, Henry looked up at the slogan mounted on the wall, "Dignity in the Sky," the words he and Lillian had handwritten decades ago in a small apartment. He turned back, meeting the CEO's eyes. Choose. And the room fell into the heavy silence of an era ending. From the perspective of a corporate culture expert, the story of Aurora Airways reveals a truth that cannot be ignored. Injustice does not emerge from a single act. It grows from small deviations that are overlooked long enough to become the new norm. The core values of an organization are not destroyed. In a day they fade gradually through every dismissive glance and every decision that places profit above human dignity. And as Henry and Lillian demonstrated, only timely intervention, firm yet deeply humane, can pull an entire system back onto the right path. If you believe every organization needs a moral compass to stay true to its course, then like and subscribe to help spread this message. Comment the phrase, "Uphold dignity" to affirm your stance.